Jim, captain of Team BCW. Streams at Jim Davis MTG as well. You can find him over there on twitch.tv.
He's one of the most wholesome Twitters as well.
And Kevin Jones now on Team Bearded Dragon. So, turn 1 Delver of Secrets from Kevin. Now, both are Azorius decks. You have Miracles and Delver. Historically, Miracles is good against Delver strategies.
Basic Island Delver sends such a message.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily know what it is. You know, Jim and Kevin worked together for a very long time, so you probably have an idea of what's going on, just knowing what Kevin likes.
Right.
But both this deck and the Is It Delver list that we saw out of Kevin King a few weeks ago back in Baltimore are both Basic Island Delver decks.
And this is the kind of thing I love when I've watched Miracles piles play against Delver. It's this really go slow strategy. You see from Jim's side, okay, Kevin plays a Delver, second basic land, make sure you have Daze mana up, swords your guy, main phase, go. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And Miracles knows their cards are more powerful. Jim knows his role in the matchup. He's not going anywhere. Kevin's not going anywhere. He is settling in for the long game.
Yeah, there's actually similar cards in both players' decks. So it's in a lot of ways going to present as a mirror. Now, Kevin's cards are a bit worse in the matchup. Those 4 Delver Secrets don't play particularly well here, though his other threats aren't too bad. 2 Snapcaster Mage, 4 Stoneforge Mystic, 2 True Name Nemesis, and 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor on Kevin's side. It leads to 10 cards here that Jim really has to respect.
Right. They both have cards that are powerful in the matchup, and their power cards are going to be similar. Those are your Jace the Mind Sculptors and things that are just difficult to answer. But then they both have cards that are going to line up a little bit awkwardly, and Kevin's have a lower floor. Yeah.
So mention that there. They both have Snapcasters and Jaces. Jim has 1 more of each. He has 3 and 3. Kevin has 2 and 2. However, Kevin has a playset of Stoneforge Mystics. Jim has none.
Jim does have Monastery Mentor, though.
Does have 3 copies of Monastery Mentor. Do you prefer one or the other in this matchup?
It depends on what your removal comes down to and how good you are at answering Batterskull.
Okay.
Because Batterskull is just a threat that is going to be there forever.
Yeah, I know that when I play blue-white and I look at Miracle-style decks, I'm always a fan of a lot of players like Jim, Joe Lissette, Reed Duke, players who just like to do nothing but maybe one Vendilion click. But then there's the other school of thought, which, you know, for example, you look at like when Brian Braunduin or Kevin Jones plays an Azorius deck where they're just going to jam some Stoneforges, some True Names, have about 10 threats. And as much as I feel like that's less elegant, a lot of times I suspect it might be better.
Right. So it's whether you want to be defensive or proactive. And there's a point where these Force of Wills and reactive cards are even better when your opponent is on the back foot rather than you trying to build to something.
So going back down to our game, what's happened on these turns, both players are sequencing some land drops. On Kevin's side, he's cast a Ponder. He's set up with a Wasteland. On Jim's side, he's actually just staying Wasteland-proof. After those first 2 basics, each turn has just been a fetch land and pass. So what's going on here?
Basically, both players know that the other have some forms of conditional counterspells. Jim Davis has things like Flusterstorm. Kevin, if you're playing Delver, you're probably going to have Daze and or Spell Pierce in your deck.
Yep.
So land drops just inevitably turn off the opponent's conditional removal if you just play lands. You know, on turn 2, we saw Jim Davis play his second basic land and Swords to Plowshares rather than ever even planning to cast it on the first turn. And both players are trying to blank the opponent's conditional removal by doing that and then find their haymakers when they get around to it.
Kevin is a player having to use some cantrips. And this long game feels like it favors Jim. I'm looking at Kevin's reactive cards. 3 Spell Pierce, 2 Daze, 2 Spell Snare. All of them can play, but as the game goes longer, I'm a little more skeptical of them. Whereas Jim's reactive cards like Terminus, Counterspell, just the extra card Counterspell, and Accumulated Knowledge, those seem like they're really going to play.
Right, and there's even a point where, you know, Jim is forcing this into a resource battle. Right, life totals literally matter because when someone hits 0, then the game is over. But the fight they're fighting is mostly going to be over card advantage and card quality. So in a certain sense, accumulated knowledge is almost a threat in its own way.
Accumulated knowledge, especially the way this game's working, is terrifying.
Exactly. It's a point where eventually Jim's just going to have all of these draw 2s with flash, right? Spell Snare is going to be incredible in this matchup. Let's be very clear about that. But they're stretched too thin. Right, Davis has Portent, Accumulated Knowledge, Snapcaster Mage, all these things that you need to be using your Spell Snares on, but Kevin only has 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, right, so it's 3 snap. When you look at those spell snares, there's 2 copies in Kevin's deck, and the cards you have to counter, Jim has 3 Snapcaster Mage, and how do I put this? There's 4 accumulated knowledge. It feels like 2 of them are things you have to counter.
Right.
Right, so it's like the first one you can let go, second one, I suppose, and after that they become must counters.
Exactly. Something's happening.
Something's happening. First thing, Kevin goes for True Name Nemesis, and because he's sensing that things are getting worse, so he makes a play.
Yeah, there's a point where you can't just stare at your Miracles opponent.
Right. Yeah, you have to. I mean, that's exactly what the Miracles player wants to do.
Exactly. You're going to end up winning the resource battle from the Miracles side of things. So that just puts Delver in the position where it needs to be the one applying pressure and being proactive, getting the game closer to a real conclusion.
So we get to see how Jim wants to fight. He has a Force of Will. He could hard cast it, but that would turn on cards like Daze, Spell Pierce. So it looks like he's going to pitch to Force of Will. Pitching Brainstorms, that's actually a good amount of respect.
Yeah, and honestly, from Jones' side, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Jim
oh, 3 fetch lands, and you want to reset 0 of the cards in your hand. Oh.
I have a really interesting question here. So Brainstorm, especially when you have 3 incorrect fetch lands, pretty good card. Jim had the option of pitching Brainstorm and pitching Spell Snare. He actually pitched Brainstorm. He's really putting a lot of value on Spell Snare here.
Right, and that's just Davis knowing his job. He's going to win if the game goes long. It's his job as the control player to just make his answers line up with Jones' threats, and Spell Snare is just the easiest answer to both Stoneforge Mystic and Snapcaster Mage.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a great counter spell. To me, to say that it's better than Brainstorm is really an endorsement. And now 2 fetches from Jim. I wonder if this is Jace the Mind Sculptor. He's fetching up for 4 mana.
Right, and at this point, Jim is going, well, maybe I just don't have the resources to go for forever. Let's just go ahead and get this show on the road, so to speak.
Yeah, once the True Name Nemesis is in play, Jim would be counting on one of his 3 copies of Terminus to answer it. He does not have a Council's Judgment in the main today, so that would be the answer. He's going to go actually for Monastery Mentor. So why did he fetch an extra land here to go for Monastery Mentor?
So at this point, you just don't want to get caught up having to fetch mid-counterspell wars. If, say, Kevin were to try to do something, it can unlock Daze, basically. You can respond to fetch lands by dazing. Yeah,
so if he had 2 fetch lands here, right? He fetched 1 fewer and cast Mentor and Kevin dazed, there's a window for something bad to happen?
Exactly. And then there's also the point where, let's say this Mentor resolves, you want to be able to instantly cast this Ponder in your hand without giving Jones permission to Swords to Plowshares with the fetch on the stack.
So Mentor gets Force of Will from Kevin, pitching a Ponder. And now there's the follow-up. Jim did have a Ponder you mentioned. He sees True Name Nemesis, Tundra, and Portent. Remember, Portent is the kind of Ponder-esque card here from, I believe, Ice Age? Looks like that's Jim keeping cards on top and drawing.
I mean, when you just see 2 spells in a land, that's kind of what you want. You still get to keep developing a little bit, and you even have the option to fetch away the cards you don't want.
Another Wasteland here from Kevin. Still Jim not giving him any targets. Here's Jace the Mind Sculptor from Kevin. Another must answer on Jim's side.
Uh-oh.
And I think that's going to resolve.
Yeah, Jim just didn't find the counterspell that turn.
Well, that can be dangerous.
There's even a point where Jim just kind of showed a little bit of weakness there by feeling the need to develop his Monastery Mentor after playing so conservatively leading up to that. It kind of says, hey, I need to use this Ponder this turn, and I'm going to try to get a little bit more value out of it, which tells Kevin if he needs to be pondering that badly, when previously it looked like Davis was respecting the fact that he's trying to win the card advantage war but can lose the mana denial war, which is why he didn't just hard cast Force of Will previously.
And those Jaces are such a big deal here. Now that one's in play, I actually have to correct myself. Earlier I said Jim had no Council's Judgment. He does have 1 copy.
That's your way out of this.
Yeah. He Spell Snares a follow-up Stoneforge Mystic, right? But yeah, he has 1 copy of Council's Judgment. That's about it. As far as attacking down the Jace, I guess if Jim finds Monastery Mentor this turn, maybe he can do it before, but this Jace will run away with the game pretty quickly.
Right. Jace is the kind of card, we were talking about how good Brainstorm was just a couple of minutes ago. How good is it here?
What if Jim has his own Jace? That's going to keep making things interesting.
That's a battle. That is a battle.
And that's what's going to happen. Jim with his own Mind Sculptor, he'll brainstorm as well. So with that Council of Judgment I mentioned, Jim has been paying so much respect to those Wastelands that he actually only has single white in play right now.
Right. The assumption here is that you can get around to finding an answer to it. You know, it feels bad that, or excuse me, finding a white source. It's more likely you just find extra lands to trip over, but he didn't want to open himself up to Wasteland and did need to fetch something that could cast that Spell Snare.
Interesting cards here from Jim. Force of Will was in the hand, but he's not. Looks like he's going to put that one away. So right now he has Force of Will, Terminus, Back to Basics, Swords to Plowshares, Portent, and I believe that last card's Accumulated Knowledge. It's right. It's interesting. Despite being a blue card, you hate to pitch Accumulated Knowledge to Force of Will.
Right. You want those in your graveyard where they belong.
Yeah. We used to see players play it with Intuition. What I like about Jim's deck is he doesn't even have Intuition. He's actually just playing Accumulated Knowledge as printed.
Look, sometimes you just really want to build a Jace's Ingenuity.
Yeah. Right, there's not even a way to discard them. It's really fair.
Yeah, and that's just the Miracles deck plans to go forever.
I don't have to sell me on that. I legitimately like that.
Yep, we know, Golden Glow Moth.
Let's just keep the game going. So, Jim, 5 basic lands in play. You mentioned he has Back to Basics. Remember, his deck is a 9 basic land deck. 6 islands, 3 plains.
Here's a Council's Judgment.
Here is a Council's Judgment from Kevin. It is his one main deck copy. Jim will quickly Force of Will there. He pitches the Portent.
Yeah, Jim's own copy of Jace is the only thing keeping him in the game at this point. You can't give that up. That is a fight you pick.
But it's dueling Jaces right now, and with both players, you know, it seems pretty even. And again, the longer they both stick in this holding pattern, I have to think it's going to favor Jim again.
Yeah, for one thing, Jim still has Council's Judgment in his deck.
He still has one left. I guess Kevin has Snapcaster Mages, right?
Right. But that kind of involves resolving multiple spells in order to make that happen. It has to get through Spell Snare and Flusterstorm from Jim's side.
Back to Basics from Jim. It's actually a little punishing because Kevin tapped one of his 2 Wastelands to cast that Council's Judgment, so he will lose 2 mana off that, not 1.
Yeah, exactly, and that's just Kevin trying to hold up as many blue sources as possible and getting punished for it.
But he still gets a Brainstorm from Jace, and he will come back. So, where do we go from here? Both players have Jace. Kevin has a Council's Judgment in the graveyard. Jim has 1 left in the deck, but I see both Jaces sticking around for a while.
Right. Most of what Kevin is trying to do here is just get a critical mass of threats that can overload the fairly conditional answers that Davis has access to, right? Davis does have things that can mop up a big battlefield like Terminus, but other than that, cards just kind of need to line up.
All right. The first Accumulated Knowledge has been used. That one just draws 1 card. The fun only increases from here.
You say fun.
Hey, everybody thinks drawing cards is
No
fun.
one else says fun.
Everyone loves drawing cards.
Yeah, I can't even argue with that. Drawing cards is nice.
Drawing cards is nice. Yeah.
All right, yeah, you got me.
Look how much fun this is. All it does is draws cards.
Yeah, it is wild that both Jaces have stuck around this long, and honestly, this game doesn't... We have a lot of game left.
Yeah. Flooded Strand from Kevin. So basic land check on Kevin's side. He has 4 islands, 2 plains in the deck. So he has 1 more of each. That Flooded Strand is still live.
So, you know, we commented on Kevin's tapping of the Wastelands earlier, but he has been fetching very well this game in order to respect the back to basics he knew would be coming from Davis.
The fun increases for Jim. It's the 2nd Accumulated Knowledge.
That's nice. That is the old flash divination.
Yeah.
Do you think Jones should sideboard 1 Accumulated Knowledge just to wait until Jim has cast all his?
Oh, it's all graveyards, isn't it?
It is all graveyards, so you just get to draw 5 cards.
That's nice. Sometimes when I draw too many cards, I start to stress out about it because I really don't like discarding to hand size. And like...
Beats? That must be a rough life, man.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't, right? It's...
Oh, no, I have so many answers that I cannot play all of them. What am I going to do? I guess you're going to win the game in 45 minutes, Matthias.
I had this problem. I used to play some Hearthstone, and I'd have the problem that I'd play these combo decks that would fill up my hand, and then every turn I would draw, and the card would burn, and I'd hate it. And like even though I'm winning, I would really stress out about my cards get burning up. Oh, I hated it.
Oh, there were so many. Was it Emperor Thorison? Was that the name of it that reduced the cost of all the cards in your hand?
Yeah, every turn?
Yeah, so you want to get up to like a 9-card hand plus Emperor. But
then you can cast them all.
Yeah, but then you end up in spots where you end up drawing too many cards because you've been holding all these in your hand the whole game.
See, I'd play Combo Priest, and the problem with that combo is you literally can't run out. Your hand size increases no matter what you do.
Yep.
So there was no way around it. You just your hand, you start burning cards, and it was just, oh, it was so stressful. I mean, you'd win, but it was really stressful because I don't like my cards getting ripped up. And I don't know. Jim is continuing to draw cards. He doesn't have to discard yet, thankfully.
He is really digging for this Council's Judgment. Basically, both players know that there's going to be a big fight over a Council's Judgment coming up, and they're both just going, all right, I need counter spells. Jim needs the Judgment. And they're just, all right, I have this. I've checked this box. I've checked this box. I need to hit land drops to cast all my counter spells. And they're just gearing up for what's going to be an enormous stack.
Does any player start plussing the Jace at some point here, or no? Is this a one?
You're fighting over having the last Jace.
Okay.
And then you might plus it. Kevin is more trying to win via damage anyway with Stoneforge Mystic, Batter Skull, True Name Nemesis. So plussing is not something he's very interested in if he can set up his threats that can answer Jim's Sculptor. But Jim really needs to find a way to answer Joan's Sculptor and is going to lose in the meantime if he doesn't find a way to do that.
Well, I mean, so Jim has 2 Monastery Mentors left and 3 Snapcasters. Can Kevin play defense? Just remove the Monastery Mentors as they're cast? Try to, end the game out Jim?
That one's a little bit rougher because some of his lands just don't untap.
I guess,
so Jim's going to win the mana war eventually.
When we fully develop, Kevin will have 6 lands and Jim will have 9, and that's where they'll end at.
Exactly.
Which means Jim can hard cast Force of Wills. I guess Kevin can hard cast them as well, but it's a bit trickier.
Well, he can't hard cast them. He can hard cast one of them.
Right. Jim actually, with only 9 mana, can only hard cast 1, but he can pay for Pierces and Dazes.
Right. The fight.
Yeah.
Spell Snare really putting in work
here.
here.
So here's what happened. Snapcaster Mage, Stoneforge Mystic from Kevin. Jim casts Snapcaster Mage. He wanted to Snapcast a Spell Snare. Kevin says no and snares the Snapcaster Mage. And it looks like the Stoneforge then resolves. Kevin's going to get a threat into play, and he'll get Batter Skull. Batter Skull, one of his 2 pieces of equipment. He has the 1 Batter Skull and the 1 Umezawa's Jite.
Big show of restraint here from Davis, but he does only have 1 blue source, so even though he had another Snapcaster in his hand, can't really do that much with it just yet.
Well, actually, he's going to use it. I think he's going to try to Swords away that Stoneforge Mystic. He doesn't want it putting Batter Skull into play uncounterably.
Exactly, and this does at least let you try to start attacking the Jace.
And Kevin, a big win. He Spell Pierces that Swords to Plowshares. It's not a great win because it does feel like Kevin gave up a card, but it's turn...
Any value off the Spell Pierce
right,
is
it's
huge.
Turn 13 and Spell Pierce countered something. Congratulations.
Getting to Spell Pierce something from your opponent with 7 lands on the battlefield and it being a 1-mana spell.
Right?
That is a rub if I've ever seen one.
Swords to Plowshares from Kevin actually takes care of the Snapcaster Mage.
Right, and this is Kevin just wanting to make sure that he can protect his Jace.
So there's that. I'm actually also interested, was the worry that if he didn't do this, Jim would unsummon his own Snapcaster?
Ooh.
Like, are we that grindy of a game?
I don't believe so. He probably just wanted to do it just while Davis was tapped out and couldn't Flusterstorm, Counterspell, anything in that vein. Because, Jim, you just get an extra card if you Brainstorm, and you also have an extra loyalty on your Jace. So Snapcaster is a valuable card, but you don't have to give up as many resources or open yourself up to just, like, what if Kevin responded to this Jace minus with Swords to Plowshares?
So Jim brainstorms. He puts back a Terminus and a Swords, plays a Scalding Tarn. His hand right now is 2 Flusterstorms. a Portent, and a Monastery Mentor. So he's going to go for the Mentor now that he's seen.
Ooh.
This is his second of 3 Monastery Mentors.
Jim can cast all the cards in his hand.
Yeah, Flusterstorm, Portent. Force of Will from Kevin. That is not going to work. That's going to eat a Flusterstorm.
Exiling a Jace here, too.
Okay, that's his second Jace.
That's a very big deal.
Yeah, that means the one in play is the only Jace he has to work with. Jim gets to convert one of his Flusterstorms. And swords away the Mentor. And that's the important part of that, swords. Otherwise, you might see something from Kevin like, I guess he could have gotten a GT, but his hand now, and both players know, is just Batterskull.
Right, and that Batterskull is a little bit of an issue. Oh my gosh. And Jim has found a way to answer the Batterskull. Off of the Portent here.
Okay.
There's a Force of Will on top that Jim's going to get to draw on Kevin's upkeep.
He still has a Flusterstorm to pitch to it.
Exactly, and all Kevin has left is this Batterskull and a Jace activation. If the Jace activation doesn't find a way to play against this Force, then Kevin's kind of going to be out of gas here.
Brainstorm from Jace. I mean, it's already difficult, right, because answering Monastery Mentor is very hard for the Azorius Delver deck. He doesn't actually have Terminus. That would be the card that in a mirror would work here.
Exactly, and it's not just about answering the Mentor. You need to mop up these 1/1s, the 1/1 monks that can pressure a Jace.
You almost need True Name plus GT to clean this up or something like that. It takes multiple cards to do it.
Exactly. There's a point where you can maybe look at something like Batterskull if you're able to check the Mentor.
Swords to Plowshares on Mentor, and it's a Force of Will for Jim to protect it. That was the play you mentioned. Gets another monk token. Jim out of cards, though.
Right, and this does mean that Kevin's able to develop this Batterskull, but at that point, now that he has so much on the battlefield, Jim can just unsummon the token with Jace.
Right, Jim can turn the corner then. Unsummoning the token with Jace makes a lot of sense. And actually, Kevin going to put Stoneforge Mystic into play, cast that instead of the Batterskull. He'll find his other equipment, which is Umezawa's GT. But I'm actually interested in Jim's spot of just unsummoning the Stoneforge, of unsummoning whatever and attacking.
Yep. Yeah, that's just such a big play here to be able to go on the offensive. Oh, it's very likely he put the Batterskull back with the Jace.
Oh, he found it again. You're right. I love that trick. It's been a while since Stoneforge has been in Legacy that I forgot this play, but of course.
Well, normally we see Stoneforge Mystic out of the Aether Vial creature decks.
Yeah, you can't do it, right?
Yeah, you're not really trying to Jace the Mind Sculptor in your Rashadan Port Thalia deck.
We did this in Standard.
That is true, and then exactly these two cards didn't get to do stuff in Standard.
Oh man, that deck was so busted.
That is true.
You do it with Squadron Hawks, that was nice.
You could do it with that, you could do it with Deceiver Exarchs, you could do it with whatever you want.
I always liked it when you Squadron Hawk, find 3 Squadron Hawks, brainstorm, and you cast Squadron Hawk and find 2 Squadron Hawks.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. You're like, oh yeah, this is nice.
This is a load of barnacles.
And Kevin gonna pick up the cards. Cannot find the win there. And Jim Davis showing really, I think, how he draws up this matchup. Go late, and eventually the Monastery Mentors and the fact his cards are more live will overpower.
Exactly. There we just saw Jim, his card quality was a little bit higher, and because he was able to make those land drops and have things like Flusterstorm that are much better at saying no as the game goes later than something like Spell Pierce, Jim had a little bit more agency to navigate to a spot where he could be proactive and shut down what Jones was trying to develop.
And only had 2 accumulated knowledge. We didn't even get to the 3rd or 4th one.
Oh my gosh. Look, sometimes you just want to concentrate.
I like this. All right, let's look at some sideboards. So the first player I want to look at is Kevin Jones. He's playing what feels like a mirror where he's disadvantaged. So he's going to have to try to improve it. So let's look at some of the cards he has. Celestial Purge, not going to play. Surgical Extraction, we can talk about it. Disenchant, Containment Priest, not really much to do there. Vendilion Click, Flusterstorm, Supreme Verdict, Gideon, and Council's Judgment. Not as many tools as I would like to see.
Right, so a lot of what we're going to be seeing out of Jones here is just things that maybe help him go a little bit bigger, but he's mostly just trying to upgrade some of his more anemic threats. You want to turn things into Vendilion Click, which is great at pressuring a Jace the Mind Sculptor, into Gideon, Allies in the Car, which is something that helps tax Davis's low count on
Gideon's
Council's
fantastic.
Judgment. Exactly. And that's most of what we're looking at from Jones. There are even some cards that he might just be looking to try and get out of his deck. You know, and you're planning to go to turn 100, Daze loses a lot of power. You're just not super excited about that type of effect.
It feels to me like the thing that Kevin can capitalize on is that Jim's deck is not actually very high on counter spells. We saw that Jace the Mind Sculptor that Kevin just ran out and worked. It was a problem, and Gideon's going to have the same effect, right? We look at Jim's deck, he has 1 counter spell, or the card counter spell.
Right, right.
4 Force of Will, which I'm not even sure he wants to keep in, but he might have to. And then his cards are Flusterstorm that doesn't counter Planeswalkers, so maybe Kevin's just trying to tap out right into Jim. Is that how he goes about this?
Yeah, there's a point where if you just load your deck up on enough threats, you turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic, counter it.
Yeah.
All right, turn 3 True Name Nemesis, counter it. All right, here's my Planeswalker on turn 4, counter it.
Yeah, Jim doesn't counter creatures and Planeswalkers very well. If it's non-creature spells, instants and sorceries, Jim can fight for a while.
Right, there's a point where, we talked about Davis being able to go, just his cards being a little bit more powerful, he goes to turn 100, but if Jones just has threat into threat into threat, and they're all sticky or attack in a different way, then it's pretty easy to envision a game where Davis just gets stretched too thin, and eventually isn't able to answer one of those cards, and those are all cards that are going to kill you if you don't answer them very quickly.
So Jim similarly has his own Gideon ally of Zendikar. I assume we're going to see that. He has his own tap-out threats like True Name Nemesis. Do you think he actually wants to do that in this matchup, or is he fine just laying back and being the control deck?
That one's just going to depend on how aggressive Davis is trying to be. He's probably going to end up playing it just because it's a free blocker and it's great at pressuring Planeswalkers. And
right.
It's just a powerhouse on its own. But it's not something he's necessarily super excited about.
So, a couple other cards. Council's Judgment seems great. He needs to answer Planeswalkers. How do you feel about Disenchant for equipment and additional copies of Back to Basics? Are any of those good enough?
Disenchant probably is not something he's particularly excited about. Batterskull is very good at naturally countering Disenchant with its own activated ability.
And you just don't care about Jite?
Exactly.
Okay.
Your plan is to check the creatures anyway, and Jite is just kind of a big burn spell a lot of the time. It's also possible you might end up seeing Engineered Explosives. That's a little bit less likely. You know, it does kill Stoneforge Mystic. It kills multiple Delvers, but that's much more something that you see as like a token sweeper or something to answer Pithing Needle.
So Jim Davis, former Players Champion here on the SCG Tour, he's 23 on our leaderboard. Kevin sitting just outside the top 32. Now, one of the ways you can get SCG points, other than our opens, are at the Star City Games IQs. That's our invitational qualifiers. So it's $1,000 to the top 8. The top 2 spots get qualifications for the Invitational. That's at SCGCon happening in June. And also points, 3 points for winning one of them. It doesn't seem like a lot, but those things do add up for the players.
Oh, absolutely. This is something where I've always been a big fan of the Invitational qualifier system. That was sort of what I was cutting my teeth on in 2014, 2015 to help me really just rack up points if I was having trouble spiking events. It was a good way to just get a qualification to the Invitational at SCGCon on the back of those extra points that they award.
Yeah, and I know because it's 15. The way to get to the Invitational is to top 8 and open,
right?
Top 2 an Invitational qualifier,
right,
or get 15 points, SCG points. So what that will mean is if you have about 12 from some opens and you really want to get, first of all, you can just go to Invitational qualifier, win one. That's your easiest path through. But even just top 8ing them can give you that extra push.
Right. If you feel like a consistent player, that's a good way to do it.
Game 2, both players on 7. And here we go on Kevin's side. Ideally, I'd want to see you board out Delvers in this matchup, but I don't think Kevin can actually do that here. He just doesn't have enough cards.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic where you end up wanting to be in a spot where you can just play threat into threat into threat into threat. And there are draws where that is part of the formula, right? We started the curve at 2 when we were talking about it during sideboarding, where you go Stoneforge, True Name, Planeswalker. It's not impossible to have Delver into Stoneforge, maybe skip your True Name turn into Planeswalker. That's also something that's going to demand an answer from Davis.
Because Kevin is on the play, do you think he might still have one of his 2 copies of Days in?
It's possible. It really depends on what his plan is post-board. If he's trying to win during the earlier phases of the game, then it's going to be an important part of that. But because his deck is a little bit more mid-rangey than your traditional Delver strategy, it's going to be harder for him to capitalize on Dazes when you can't even Wasteland Jim out most of the time.
Jim's turn 1 ponder sees another ponder, a Flusterstorm, and a Vendilion Click. You can tell by his head he didn't really like that. I think he wanted to see another land in there.
Yeah, there's a spot where you kind of think maybe I want to do ponder because that's technically an extra look. But if the other 2 cards aren't good enough anyway, you might as well just go ahead and cash in on the shuffle.
Right, what you always want to see is a fetch land, a card you really like, and then a card you don't like, and then it's easy mode.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll take the one I like, then I'll fetch away before I draw that third one.
Oh, there are so many fetch land tricks in this format.
Stoneforge Mystic finding Batterskull from Kevin here on the second turn.
And it looks like Davis did pick up a couple of lands, one off the Ponder and one off the draw step. So he should be in a good spot here.
And Jim finds second land. Didn't notice Kevin was on a 6-card hand this game. Stoneforge will help there.
It just undid the mulligan.
Yeah, and you get a 1-2.
And this is the beginning of the formula of the games that Jones wins.
Now Kevin just passing here. I don't think he has a third land.
Yikes.
Well, he does have a Stoneforge, so right, it still plays, but not where you want to be in a blue-white mirror.
Exactly, and this is a spot where Jim needs to figure out how he's actually going to answer this Batterskull, as Kevin did get to untap with the Stoneforge Mystic. So we know Batterskull is going to hit the battlefield. It's now, it's not if, it's when, and how Davis is going to win from there.
So Jim is going to end-step Brainstorm with that fetch land in play. There is a Swords to Plowshares he has found. I'm interested to see whether he goes for that on end step or whether he'll just do it main phase to protect against Spell Pierce and Daze.
Right, and this ends up being a weird position where Jim just needs to try and figure out if he's drawing to Terminus to try and answer the Stoneforge, since at that point it wouldn't be very good for Jones to flash in the Batterskull with Stoneforge's ability.
And Jim decides to play around things, so he does not go for the end step Swords, but upkeep he'll go ahead and fetch out another land. Looking through his deck as he was shuffling, some number of Disenchant have come in out of the sideboard. You do see them in the list.
Yeah, and that's to check Batterskull, honestly, where if Davis is going, I'll win in the late game when you can activate to return the Batterskull to your hand anyway. Let's make sure I don't just lose in the earlier phases of the game. It's a fine way to do that.
Wouldn't mind drawing on Disenchant here, to be honest. You can Swords the Stoneforge, Disenchant the Batterskull, move on with your life. It's fine.
Yeah, it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be a 2-for-1 no matter what. Jones has already cashed in his +1 in terms of card advantage, just getting to search up the Batterskull. So you just kind of got to take your medicine and find your window to answer both of the cards if you're planning to win this game.
Interesting. Jim going to cast Portent. Flusterstorm, Land, Vendilion Click. I don't know if he likes those.
We're very good at finding Ponder, Vendilion Click. We've been finding those all game.
Yeah, he's going to shuffle again. I think Disenchant or Jace he wants to find something that can actually answer this board.
Exactly. You're just looking for a way to be able to check the Stoneforge problem.
Do you think any number of Force of Will are still in Jim's deck right now?
It's a little bit tough. They're much better on the draw than they are on the play.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible that Jim just wants to make sure he has answers to these cards without getting destroyed by the mana disadvantage.
Now, I do have one thing I wanted to mention. So Jim had options at Vendilion Clicks, and there is a trick there that was if Jim had one in his hand, he actually had a window here to do something pretty nice against that Stoneforge.
Oh, absolutely. It's where Kevin activates the Stoneforge, you respond to the activation, click your opponent, and then put the Batterskull in the bottom of their library.
Right. Did not happen, though. Kevin got to untap and now swings in for 5. And you saw him reaching for that blue mana. He has Delver of Secrets in his hand. Those are still in post board, though I think this might be a Brainstorm we're looking at.
Right. Kevin still needs to find mana, and it's a spot where if you think you're going to hit a land off of this, you can put 2 back, and then you get a chance to cast the Delver off the land you find anyway.
And actually, this board is already good enough to earn a Terminus, so he may not put the Delver down until something changes.
Yeah, it's tough. The big draw to wanting to develop the Delver onto the battlefield is it does change the clock pretty significantly.
Yeah. Big miss, Kevin. Brainstorm locked. Did not find a land here as he put 2 cards back.
Oof.
Now, Jim doesn't have an answer yet. He uses Accumulated Knowledge end step. That's the first one. He does have Jace the Mind Sculptor that he picked up.
And it looks like he also has a Council's Judgment hiding out in there.
Yeah, and against 1 white mana open. I mean, I guess he has to respect Daze.
Luckily for Davis, he has just the thing, the 4th land.
And this is where that mana advantage matters, right? He doesn't have to. There's no fear of Spell Pierce going on.
Exactly. And Jones having kind of getting a little bit greedy and punished. And greedy might be strong, but getting punished for doing this brainstorm on his main phase and missing.
Council's Judgment from Jim. Now Kevin does have a Force of Will. Feels like he's going to have to Force of Will here if he loses the Batter Skull. This is such a tough spot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. At that point, Jones will have nothing really going on. He'll just have 2 cards that didn't seem to play last turn coming off the top of his library.
He exiles Delver of Secrets to it. And Jim ponders.
Oh my gosh, it's Terminus. There's a Terminus hiding out there. Ooh. Ooh.
Terminus in the top 3. Yeah, this time Jim's not shuffling. This wasn't Ponder and Vendilion
like,
Click. This is a bit better.
I think I'll keep these.
Down to 13. He's going to take one more hit, but Terminus might be able to keep him alive from there. Kevin goes down, swings. Jim is down to 8. Top card is Terminus.
Trigger.
And Kevin, no response. Germ Token goes away. Stoneforge Mystic goes to the bottom of the deck. Back to Jim we go. He just passes. And Kevin puts Snapcaster Mage into play.
Snakecaster Mage.
I wonder, do you think this earns the Swords to Plowshares in Jim's hand?
It's a little bit tough. It depends on if he values the Ancestral Knowledge, or excuse me, Accumulated Knowledge higher than the Swords here. He is at 8, so it's probably something he's interested in dealing with eventually. So you probably just have to, especially if you're thinking, well, that spell resolved. So it's not a Force of Will in Jones' hand. Do I just want to try to Jace next turn anyway?
This is interesting. So Jim gets, he wants to accumulate knowledge and swords. One of the 2 cards gets to be Daze Proof, and the other one is not. And he went for the accumulated knowledge first, actually.
He's just trying to hit land drops.
Yeah. Well, he's on his end steps. So he can't play them now. But he does swords the Snapcaster, and there was no Daze. So he got to have both.
Right. And the digging is important there. It is his end step, but he does need to make sure that resolves because he has so many good cards in his hand. If he loses the game, it will be on the back of not getting to cast them, not him not having enough good cards.
And now here comes the win condition. It's Monastery Mentor. Kevin tries to swords it, but Jim has the Flusterstorm. He gets a Monk token, and we pass back. Kevin, another swords in his hand. He can still keep the Monastery Mentor alive, but the mana disadvantage is real.
All right, we're clawing back.
It's a land, yeah. But look at Jim's hand. It's another Monastery Mentor and a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Kevin has so much work to do here.
Oh, yeah, Jim. This is actually kind of the reverse, right, of the sides of the battlefield or the table that we talked about going into this, where if Jones just presented a few sticky threats that are hard to answer, Davis is going to struggle. But here we just see Monastery Mentor and a Monastery Mentor and a Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Swords to Plowshare sends Jim back up to 10. He has his 5th land here. Counterspell now in his hand. I wouldn't mind casting Monastery Mentor with Counterspell up. That seems pretty good. That's what Jim will do.
Oh yeah, this is a nice turn.
Swings in for 1 with the Monk token. He's got Kevin taking a hit, but really this is about board control. This is not about a race. Kevin at 28, but once Jim gains control of the board, that's not going to matter.
Right. You know, Jones doesn't have a ton of card advantage engines that aren't mana intensive, so that mana disadvantage that we've been highlighting is going to come back and bite him here now that he's starting to fall a bit behind.
Kevin has picked up True Name Nemesis, but does he want to play one into the double blue that Jim has? He may not have a choice.
Yeah, this is kind of the spot where it always feels bad because you have to go, well, they probably have it, but the only way I win the game is if they don't have it.
Right.
So I guess I make them have it.
But Jim has it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, it's still right. Yeah, it's like, I will burn your counterspell, and then Jim will say, yes, you will burn my counterspell, and then that's what happens.
That is true. I would like to trigger my Monastery Mentor.
Yeah, could not do this quicker. And both players know it. Casts the True Name Nemesis. Jim fetches up the island. Here's double blue. Puts the Monk token into play. Counters it. Kevin, as predicted, drops it into the graveyard.
I am shocked. Shocked, I tell you. Not that.
And now we might see a pre-combat Ponder here from Jim.
Or a pre-combat Jace. It pumps everything.
Both of them, yeah. How much? You know, he's at 26, so I think he's still got a couple turns left, so it's just going to be the Jace.
You might as well, if you know you're going to do it this turn.
Yeah, and Kevin extends the hand. He's not dead this turn, but he can't answer the Jace. There's another Monk token, and it is 2-0 for Jim Davis. Coming off that bye, he picks up the win and moves on.
Right, and that's just